Hi there. Maybe you've woken up in a quiet home. No voices, no footsteps, no sounds but the rhythm of your own breath. And maybe, just for a moment, that silence made you pause, made you wonder, is this loneliness? Or is this something else entirely? Because here's the truth. We've been told, for generations, that a woman's worth is defined by who she loves, who she raises, or who she takes care of. Wife, mother, daughter, caregiver. But what if, after 60, a woman begins to measure herself by something far deeper? By her peace, her presence, her power. What if I told you that living alone isn't the end of a story, it's the beginning of the most powerful chapter yet? Stay with me until the end of this video, because we're not just talking about solitude, we're talking about transformation, the kind that begins within and changes everything on the outside. Being alone is not a failure. It's a turning point. There was a time, not too long ago, when a woman's worth was almost entirely defined by who she loved, who she raised, and who she cared for. Her value was closely tied to her ability to nurture, to maintain a household, and to serve the needs of everyone around her. And if, for any reason, she ended up living alone, society rarely saw it as a choice. Instead, it was labeled lonely, unwanted, even incomplete. That label still echoes. She never married. She lives by herself. What a shame. The message is subtle, but it's everywhere, implying that if a woman doesn't have someone beside her, she must have failed. But here's the truth no one talks about. More and more women, especially those over 50, 60, even 70, are choosing to live alone, not because they've given up, but because they're finally choosing themselves. They're not waiting for someone to rescue them or validate them. They're not pausing their lives in anticipation of being chosen. Instead, they are embracing solitude as something sacred, something powerful, something transformative. Because this isn't about being against love, against men, or against connection. It's about finally realizing that connection with yourself is the most important relationship you'll ever have. And for many women, that connection doesn't fully begin until the noise dies down and the room is finally quiet. Psychologist Carl Jung called solitude a crucible, a container for transformation. Not an escape from the world, but a return to the self. A place where the outer roles, wife, mother, caretaker, fade, and something deeper begins to stir. Let me share a story. Her name was Claire. After a 35-year marriage and decades of putting everyone else first, she found herself living alone for the very first time at age 61. At first, the silence felt unbearable. No one calling her name, no one needing dinner, no one asking, "Where are my socks?" But within that silence, something unexpected happened. She started hearing herself. Not the roles she played, not the voice she used to keep peace, but her own thoughts, her own dreams, her own voice. She picked up books she hadn't touched in years. She walked without a destination. She stood at the mirror one morning, brushing her hair, and whispered to herself, "I didn't disappear. I've been here all along." And that, right there, that's not failure. That's a breakthrough. Solitude doesn't mean she's missing someone. It means she's finally meeting herself. And that moment, that first meeting with the woman you've become, it's just the beginning. Because on this journey back to yourself, you'll encounter a part of you that's been waiting quietly in the background, your inner strength, your assertiveness, your clarity of direction. Carl Jung called it the animus, and awakening it might just change everything. Facing the power within, a reunion with the self. Carl Jung once said that every woman carries within her an inner masculine energy, the animus. It isn't about becoming less feminine. It's about becoming whole. For so long, many women were taught that their strength came from outside themselves, from their husbands, their families, their roles. But when life grows quiet and a woman finds herself alone, not because she's been abandoned, but because she chose to walk away or life simply changed, something extraordinary can happen. For the first time, there is space. Space to think. Space to make decisions. Space to hear a voice that's been quietly waiting behind the noise of everyday demands. That voice is not soft. It is not timid. It says things like, "You've got this," and "You don't need permission anymore." This is the animus, and solitude is its invitation. When a woman is no longer relying on someone else to fill her gas tank, fix the sink, or validate her choices, she discovers something no relationship ever could have given her. Inner authority. Quiet confidence. A strength that doesn't come from being needed, but from finally needing no one to stand on her own. Let me tell you about Ellen. She's 68. She spent most of her life leaning into the softness society expected. The caregiver, the listener, the one who asked, "What do you need?" For decades, she let her husband handle the finances, drive the car, plan the vacations. After their divorce, she was terrified. She didn't know how to do any of it on her own. But then, she did. She booked a solo trip up the coast. She rented a cabin by the lake and drove there herself. She learned to read a map, to check the oil, to build a fire. That trip didn't just change her, it revealed her. She looked in the mirror that night and saw someone she'd never met before. Someone strong. Someone whole. Someone who had always been there, but was finally stepping forward. That's what facing the animus looks like. Not rejecting help or love, but no longer depending on it to feel complete. It's about accessing the part of you that says, "I can make this decision. I can hold my ground. I can live this life. Not by default, but by design." Carl Jung didn't view this shift as rebellion. He saw it as individuation, the process of becoming yourself. Truly, fully, deeply. The woman who integrates her animus isn't trying to be a man. She's finally honoring the parts of herself that were buried under expectations. Logic, direction, action, authority. All the things she once waited for someone else to bring to the table. She now brings herself. And here's the most powerful part. She's not rejecting men. She's reclaiming herself. That reclaiming doesn't mean she'll never love again or never desire companionship. It simply means she'll no longer sacrifice her center to have it. But this journey isn't just about strength. It's not always empowering quotes and triumphant road trips, because when you meet yourself, you also meet the shadows you've spent a lifetime avoiding. And that part? That truth? It isn't always easy. When shadows appear, don't avoid them. Look straight at them. Carl Jung had a name for the part of ourselves we spend most of our lives hiding. He called it the shadow. It's not evil. It's not wrong. It's just the truth we were never taught how to accept. And here's the thing about living alone. Eventually, the shadow shows up. When you strip away the noise, the obligations, the small talk, and the expectations, what's left is silence. And in that silence, something long buried starts to rise. The fear, the grief, the old anger that never found a place to land. You start to wonder, why do I feel forgotten? Am I still seen? Do I matter without someone else to need me? These are not signs of weakness. They're invitations. Because the shadow isn't your enemy. It's your neglected self, finally asking to be heard. Jung believed that confronting the shadow is one of the most important stages of self-realization. And it almost never happens in a crowd. It happens when the distractions are gone, when the mirror gets quiet, and when you stop running from yourself. You might sit on the edge of your bed, stare out a window, and cry, but not because something just happened. Sometimes you cry because nothing's happening, and that stillness unlocks a sadness you've carried for decades. Maybe no one ever told you that you were allowed to feel forgotten, that you could grieve the version of you that sacrificed too much, that your worth was never meant to be proven through constant doing. But here's the healing truth. The only way out is through. If you avoid this inner confrontation, it will linger. It will turn into bitterness or numbness or that low hum of something's missing. But if you face it, if you let yourself cry, journal, speak to a therapist, walk in the woods and say, "Yes, this hurts," you create space. Space not just for pain, but for clarity. Because behind the shadow lives your true essence, the parts of you you exiled to please the world. A woman who walks through her darkness doesn't become colder. She becomes clearer. She begins to know where her yes ends and her no begins. She stops over-giving. She stops apologizing for existing. She stops shrinking to make others comfortable. And here's what most people don't see. Healing isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like breakthrough moments or dramatic awakenings. Sometimes it's simply sitting in the quiet, whispering, "I'm still here," and meaning it. In solitude, the shadow stops being a threat and becomes a guide. You don't have to fix it all at once. You don't have to turn into someone new overnight. You just have to stop hiding from what you already know deep down. That the real you isn't broken, just buried. In the quiet, the shadows rise. But that's where healing begins. And once you've moved through that darkness, not avoided it, not bypassed it, but walked straight through it, what comes next isn't more emptiness. It's something almost miraculous. It's rebirth. Living alone is not escaping. It's returning home. There's a story we've been told, that the woman who lives alone is somehow missing something, that she's running from love or from life. But what if that story is entirely wrong? Across centuries, cultures, and myths, there have always been women who chose solitude, not as escape, but as sacred return. Think of Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt. She roamed the wilderness not because she was unloved, but because she belonged to no one. Her solitude was power, wild, untamed, deeply connected to nature and herself. She was a protector, a force, and a reminder that independence can be divine. Or take Virginia Woolf, who once wrote that a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. But her words weren't just about writing. They were about space. Emotional, intellectual, spiritual space. Space to think, to breathe, to be, without being asked to serve someone else's story. Even in Slavic folklore, we meet Baba Yaga, the old crone in the woods. Yes, she was feared. Yes, she lived alone. But if you look deeper, she wasn't a monster. She was a wise woman, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of transformation, the outsider who knew things others had forgotten. These figures, divine, creative, mystical, have long been cast as strange or other. But maybe they weren't strange. Maybe they were just ahead of their time. Today, more and more women are beginning to understand what these archetypes knew all along, that solitude is not exile. It's not loneliness. It's not a sign of failure. It's a return, a coming home to yourself. Because when you live alone, something shifts. You stop performing. You stop adjusting. You stop asking, who should I be for them? And start asking, who am I when I'm just me? It's not always glamorous. It's not always easy. But it is real. You decide what time you eat. You decide what silence feels like. You choose your rhythms, your rituals, your reflection. And slowly, gently, you begin to feel a new kind of companionship, one that doesn't need permission or performance or proof, the companionship of the self. This doesn't mean you've sworn off connection. It means you've stopped using it to fill a space you were always meant to fill yourself. Women like Artemis, Wolf, and Baba Yaga didn't reject the world. They simply refused to lose themselves in it. They said, "This is my space. This is my time, and I will use it to become." So if you find yourself waking up in a quiet home, know that you're not alone in your aloneness. You walk in the footsteps of women who chose solitude not because they gave up, but because they finally showed up for themselves. She's not alone. She's with the most important person in her life, herself. And in the end, the deepest truth isn't whether you're alone. It's how you live with the one person who will always be there. You. Lonely or alone? It's a choice, not a sentence. Let's pause and ask a question most people are too afraid to answer honestly. Are you truly lonely? Or are you simply alone? Because they are not the same thing. Solitude is a physical state, being by yourself. Loneliness is an emotional experience, feeling unseen, unheard, disconnected. And here's the truth. You can be surrounded by family, in a room full of people, even sharing a bed with someone, and still feel deeply, achingly alone. Or you can sit in a quiet home, with no one to cook for, no one to check in with, and still feel full, rooted, alive. So the question isn't about proximity to others. It's about the quality of the relationship you have with yourself. In a society that rushes to fill every silence, that tells women their value comes from being needed, solitude is often misunderstood. It's seen as punishment, as lack. But solitude, when chosen, is one of the most courageous acts of self-definition a woman can make. Because to be alone by choice is not about rejection. It's about reclamation. It means saying, I will no longer fear my own thoughts. It means learning to be okay without constant validation. It means replacing the question, what if no one's coming, with, what if I'm exactly who I've been waiting for? Let me ask you this. Are you staying in a life that feels small, predictable, maybe even painful, because you're afraid to be alone? Or are you stepping into a life that is yours, fully yours, even if that means less noise, fewer visitors, and more time with your own soul? Because that distinction, fear versus freedom, makes all the difference. There's something quietly radical about choosing your own company. Waking up in the morning and realizing the silence around you isn't emptiness. It's space. Space for thought. Space for healing. Space for the parts of yourself that were drowned out by obligation. Some might still call that loneliness. But maybe, just maybe, it's presence, the kind that doesn't need to explain itself. Solitude is not absence. It's presence, your presence. And when a woman becomes brave enough to stay in that presence, to sit with the silence and not flinch, something extraordinary begins to unfold. Wholeness. No one needs to approve it but you. Let's talk about something deeper than happiness, deeper than success, deeper even than love. Let's talk about wholeness. In the language of Carl Jung, this is what he called individuation, the process of becoming your most complete, most integrated self. Not the self that others expect, not the version that checks all the boxes, but the self that is entirely, fully you. And for many women, this journey begins not in a crowded house, not in the company of others, but in the stillness of living alone. Because when you're no longer defined by who you serve, who you support, or who you stand beside, something extraordinary happens. You meet you, not the caretaker, not the achiever, not the wife, or the mother, or the friend. You meet the woman beneath it all, the soul that was always there, but often too quiet to hear. It's in this solitude that a woman learns she doesn't need anyone else to tell her she's complete. She feels it in the morning light that filters through her window. She feels it when she laughs alone in the kitchen at something only she would find funny. She feels it when she walks into her own home, and it welcomes her with peace, not silence. And it's not always loud, this wholeness. It's not always grand. Sometimes it feels like a deep breath, like walking barefoot on familiar ground, like knowing finally that you don't need to be more or less, just present. Carl Jung believed that this integration, this union of shadow and light, masculine and feminine, the conscious and the unconscious, was the highest calling of the human soul. It's not about having everything. It's about knowing you already are everything. You no longer chase love to feel alive. You no longer perform strength to be respected. You no longer shrink to make others more comfortable. You rise, not because someone tells you to, but because it's simply who you are. You trust your intuition. You honor your limits. You feel beautiful even when no one is watching. And in that quiet knowing lies your freedom. She is not unfinished. She is unfolding. And when a woman realizes that her very being is enough, not because of who loves her, but because of how deeply she loves herself, that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of a life finally lived on her terms. Would you like me to move forward to the emotional conclusion for this script? Being alone doesn't mean you're missing something. It means you are enough. Let's take a breath together. After everything we've explored, the history, the shadows, the myths, and the quiet strength of women who walk their path alone, one truth rises above all. Living alone doesn't mean living less. It means living fully, on your own terms. Not everyone will understand it. Some will call it lonely. Others will think it's sad. But they don't know what it feels like to wake up and hear only your own voice, and realize it's enough. They haven't felt the peace that comes with not needing to perform for anyone. They haven't discovered the joy of choosing solitude. Not because you gave up, but because you came home to yourself. You are not behind. You are not missing a piece. You are not waiting for permission to feel whole. You are already here. You don't need a witness to validate your worth. Your life, lived deeply, honestly, courageously, is enough. Whether you're in a quiet apartment with a single teacup in the sink, or in a house filled with memories and silence, know this: you are not a half waiting for a whole. You are the whole. So give yourself credit, not for being strong all the time, but for being true. Give yourself love, not because someone else offered it, but because you learned how to give it first. You haven't chosen the easy road. You've chosen the real one. And that's beautiful. If this video gave you clarity, comfort, or even just a sense that you're not alone, hit like, subscribe, and share it with another woman who's finding her way home to herself. Because solitude isn't a silence to fear. It's a sacred space to grow. And you, dear one, are growing beautifully.